Welcome, everyone. My name is Kathy Hsieh with the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, and we're so thrilled to have you join us here today for our presentation on arts recovery through anti-racist action. The Seattle Office of Arts and Culture is a city government office based on the lands of the Duwamish tribe and the other Coast Salish tribes. We do want to give special acknowledgement to our Mayor Bruce Harrell, our acting director, Royal Ally Barnes, and on tech support today is Jasmine Jackson. So if you are having any text issues, you can feel free to private message. It's labeled tech support in the chat, and she will respond as she's able to. We also have ASL interpretation today, so they will be alternating. And we thank you so much for joining us. As we want to also give our deepest appreciation for the federal funding from the American Rescue Plan Act that is funding this program today, as well as the Surdna Foundation Thriving Cultures Program, Race Forward, Seattle Theater Leaders, Sound Theater, Aaron Bednar's, Ariel Bradler, Malie Fuji, Mario Oralo Molinaro, Naho Shioya, Roger Tang, and Jay O'Leary Woods for all of their support in a lot of the background work that went behind this program today. And our deepest, deepest gratitude goes to the caretakers of the land that we are on. They've been caring for this land for thousands of years. And that again is the Coast Salish tribes, specifically the Duwamish on the land that I'm on. I want to always, when we acknowledge the tribes, to also acknowledge that they are some of our most vibrant, active, cultural workers and artists in our community, and they are still here with us doing some of the most incredible work, not only for our arts and cultural community, but also for our environment and climate work that we are all needing to focus on. And one thing I do want to encourage is that the Duwamish tribe currently is hosting a native art online auction here in Seattle, but it's available for anyone anywhere in the world to partake in, and that online auction goes through November 30th. It's a tangible, vital way of supporting our local tribes, and there is a link in the chat for you to check out and see what they have on the auction. So today's session, we are focusing on the reality of, as the arts and cultural sector, which was the first to be shut down during the pandemic, and it is slowly but surely starting back up over the past year. We wanted to use this session to really focus on how, as our cultural sector strives to recover from the pandemic, a part of our moving forward is how do we really create a more equitable and human-centered working culture. Today, you're going to hear from some of the most brilliant artists and culture workers in Seattle who will share their wisdom, vision, and advice to inspire all of us and our arts and cultural and heritage sector on what it means to be more inclusive and anti-racist in how we move forward. I do need to share that Sarah Porkalab, who is an artist, activist, and creator of the Dragon Cycle, is currently performing on Broadway. She has 2 shows today, and unfortunately, she got called in to an early call at the exact time that she was going to join us here in between her shows. So unfortunately, she just messaged me. She was not going to be able to join today's panel, but I'm going to be recording a special segment just with her, and we will send out that video link to everyone who registered for today's session. But we still have an incredible panel, and I'm thrilled to introduce the first panelist, Valerie Curtis Newton. Valerie is currently the head of directing at the University of Washington School of Drama. She also serves as the founding artistic director for the Hansberry Project, a professional African-American theater lab, and has directed for professional theaters across the country, including the Guthrie, Denver Center, Seattle Rep, Alabama Shakespeare Festival, Intimon Theater, Seattle Children's Theater, the Mark Taper Forum, New York Theater Workshop, and Southern Repertory Theater. And I'm happy to bring on camera Valerie Curtis Newton.
Hi, Kathy. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you.
My visual description today is that I'm a Black woman in my early 60s. I have a short afro. I'm wearing silver earrings and glasses, and I have a necklace that is a mask, an African mask. And I'm sitting in my office, which is a little bit cluttered, but I'm present. So I want to thank you guys for having me. For those of you who don't know much about the Hansberry Project, we were founded in 2004 and officially launched in 2006. It was basically created as an African-American theater lab where our artists were encouraged to provide the community with consistent access to the African-American lens. At the Hansberry Project, we present the work of Black playwrights, Black theater artists mostly. We also host cultural events that feature a Black lens. We produce Black plays, and we do that because we believe that Black theater artists artfully expressing their observations and investigations, hopes and dreams must be an integral part of a rich, full-throated civic conversation. It's especially important in a place like Seattle, where Black people represent between 5 and 8% of the total population. So we have to acknowledge from the very beginning that we have a special charge to make art in one of the whitest cities in the nation. It's been in theater that we have come together to express the state of our community. It's where our dreams can be dreamed and where our collective hurts can be healed. And as we gather, just as in church, we come to understand that we are not alone. We're not the first to take up the challenge. There have been Black theater companies here for a very long time, and we acknowledge and are grateful for Black Arts West, New Black Arts West, Langston Hughes Performing Arts Institute, Langston, the Negro Ensemble and the Negro Repertory Company, and the Paul Robeson Theater, among others. So our work has always required that we examine our relationship to the predominantly white environment in which we're making that work. But our mission and our internal compass says the Black person's voice is central in the expression of our artistic selves. We understand that by supporting these voices, we're broadening the culture. And so it doesn't only benefit us, it benefits everyone around us. The goal is to get our work out into the world so that it can do its work. We want to do it in a way that's excellent. And when we first began, we were in an incubator at a contemporary theater. In 2010, we moved out of that into a more relationship, more simply in the community without that incubator. We've been on our own since then, and we've been doing pretty well. We've produced a lot of work in co-productions with theaters around the city. And we've also hosted cultural events, and we'll continue to do all of those things going forward. In terms of this question of working in a new way or in the hopes of a new, more human-centered, anti-racist environment, I think that what's critical is we need to continue to evaluate and assess where the resources are coming from and where the resources are going to, and how the missions of ethnically specific theater companies cannot die in the process of predominantly white organizations doing the right things, getting better about inclusivity, I said this the other day, and it's a little bit dramatic, but we want to be very careful that the success in countering anti-Black racism and white supremacy in institutions doesn't result in harm to ethnically specific theaters and theater artists in the process. We don't want their success to kill us. I'm seeing right now some signs of that should be heartening, which is that people are having conversations about ways to move forward, and some organizations are implementing change. And I think there is still a tremendous amount of fear and a tentativeness in the process of making new. And what can happen is that we set up more and more gatekeepers in order to avoid doing harm. And I want us to be brave, and I want us to be considerate, empathic, compassionate, and anti-racist. And that's going to mean that we have to get better at communicating and allowing that, quite frankly, we're all going to screw up. And how we process that screwing up, how we acknowledge it, how we apologize where we have screwed up, how we make amends, how we change, how we develop, that's all also a part of the conversation. I think right now we're focused a lot on prevention, which is important. And we need to start a conversation about remediation and repair. And I think that that's a big thing that I'm seeing right now, is a desire to be more safe rather than a desire to be brave, and to deal with the consequences of that braveness, and to understand the difference between harm, stress, discomfort. Those are not all the same things. And each of us needs to evaluate what it means to us and how we more accurately engage in conversations around those things. I think that a big issue for me has been a lot about the redistribution of resources. And one of the things that's happening is that there are more collaborations and co-productions between organizations. We need to get better about expressing our intentions in co-producing and expressing our true needs and what we need in return. So I feel like the next phase is communication. How do we get brave? And also, how do we engender trust that that we want to continue to be on the edge of something, as opposed to safe and protected and doing the expected always to avoid controversy and provocation. I think, and those of you who have heard me speak before, that I really believe that the word theater should be in the dictionary with a synonym that says to provoke. The verb of theater is to provoke. So I think that's all I have to say, and I'll be happy to talk more when we get to the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Valerie. So I'm going to introduce our next presenter, and Aimee Chou is a deaf theater artist and administrator who has performed with Sound Theater, Hope Summer Repertory Theater, Theater Battery, Deaf Spotlight, and understudying at Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Aimee has also written and received productions for scripts, including the upcoming world premiere of her play Autocorrect Thinks I'm Dead with Sound Theater. And if Aimee can come onto screen, that would be great.
Hi, thank you, Kathy. I am just going to go ahead and give a visual description of myself. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. So I am an Asian woman. I'm wearing a dark t-shirt and I have some light and shadow behind me and a plant. I have long dark hair and oh, and my pronouns are she, her. And thank you, everyone. Let's go ahead and let's start our presentation. I have a slide that I would like to share with all of you from a PowerPoint because it's pretty much a hot topic happening right now. So let's go ahead and share that slide if you can for me, Kathy. So there's two things that you can see in this slide. First off is the situation with a deaf audience member who was using captions to enjoy the show on stage. And when an actor noticed this, they believe that the deaf audience member was recording and they blew up on that deaf audience member. The second incident is for the musical The Lion King, also on Broadway. And the director for the interpreters decided that because the cast is predominantly Black and it also represents various African culture, it was not appropriate to have a white sign language interpreter, but the white sign language interpreter was working with them and ended up suing the production. So I'm not going to go into detail and overanalyze these two because of time constraints, but I want to do a bit of a poll and think about what is going on and if this could happen here in Seattle. So go ahead and just comment yes or no in the chat if you think this is something that could happen in Seattle.
Actually, Aimee, we have the poll launching for people.
Great, thank you. So I'll just give you guys a few moments to answer.
About 75% have responded so far. Okay, I will end the poll.
All right, I'm curious to see what the results. What are people saying? Oh, wow. So 99% of people voted yes, that this could happen here in Seattle. So thank you so much for your answers and being honest. So the purpose of that poll was to get a pulse on Seattle and about these conversations and these journeys of disability in this sphere, and also in the results of racism and how disability intersect. And I noticed in Seattle, we're a bit different than New York. We're a bit behind in New York when it comes to the realm of accessibility. And there has been a lot of things that has not happened in New York that has happened in Seattle that we haven't had in Seattle yet that New York City has. In regards to disability justice, we're still taking those baby steps to build up to that accessibility. And we still really have to break those boundaries and have those important discussions to fix those problems and to continue to get to our goal. And it's a slow process. You know, growing up, I wasn't really able to have that access to theater. I had immigrant parents, and my first time being able to have full access to a show was, I believe, around 15 years ago. And, oh, actually not 15 years, it was 10 years ago. And it was very interesting at that time because it was a spotlight that was set up on the show. And there was a deaf spotlight. And since then, there's been more recognition and more accessibility for interpreters in theater, and even here in Seattle. I believe that was one of the first steps for empowerment, even if it was small, even if it was a small theater. And really that small theater rolling up their sleeves and getting into the work to provide that access and set up that access for the disabled community and for disabled audiences and for artists. So the Sound Theater Company is a good representation of this. They're a small company, but they are one of those companies that really dig into it and the importance of providing access. I worked there with the Sound Theater Company for I've been working there for about 3 years. And I've had several roles that I've worked there, and I've seen the system change. For myself, I'm a mother, I have children, and there are certain barriers for me as a performer, but the Sound Theater Company actually provided me a stipend for my childcare. And so now I am able to show this to all of you so you can think about it and ponder the steps that they've taken. Oh, I want to demonstrate, sorry, interpreter correction, demonstrate these things to you. So there's two things I would like to demonstrate to all of you. The first of these two is, well, I wanted to ask all of you to evaluate your failures and what you've learned and what you have experimented on, and what you've learned and where have you failed in these experiments. And then in the scientific method, you try again when those experiments fail. And also in regards to white supremacy in culture, there is a idea of perfection. There's this obsession with perfection. And it is very common in these areas that accessibility is not something that is given, and people is seen as when they fail that they don't want to try again, but you have to try again so you can learn from those failures. And that is something that the Sound Theater Company has done. At the Sound Theater Company, we experiment. We use chat features. And we use text-to-speech and various technologies. We use PowerPoints to provide accessibility. We also have Spanish language services as well, and Spanish captions. And none of these things are perfect, but that's an example of how you roll up your sleeves and you get in and you actually try. So now I want to envision two different ways of running financials and budgeting. The first way of this budgeting is, well, there is the actor side or the performance side, the theater side. So there's the theater house side, and that is $30,000. $30 million. And then there is $500,000 on the other side. $350 million. But these are not being put to the accessibility that it is required to. The accessibility is not the same within these two. Right. So one is a larger theater house, and they have a lot more capital available to them. And maybe they were able to improve accessibility in their restrooms. While a smaller theater house, they might not have that same ability to, with their funds, to set that up. So they have to get creative with how they use their funds and their capital in other ways. The next thing I want to talk about is the missions. So let's put aside the first part that we were talking about, and now we want to focus on these missions. So let's focus on this for a moment, not fully put aside, but I want you all to think about how to start accessibility in your companies and in your organizations. Look at your organization's budgets. How to prioritize certain things. Maybe you have to start small, and that's fine. But you can gradually build this up every day, every year. And for example, the board of directors. Maybe the board of directors think, why would we have to spend funds on interpreters? Or perhaps they would ask, why do we need a specific designer for certain things? A sound designer. And I'm not saying that a sound designer is not important. I'm not trying to break that cultural part. That might be something that is important for your organization, but just as something that is important to consider. All right, well, thank you so much for listening to me. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aimee. The next presenter that I'm going to introduce is José Montaño. And José is Aymara-Quechua, is the curator of United Indians of All Tribes Foundation's Sacred Circle Gallery. José has a long history with United Indians, from designing pascalas to working directly with youth. He is an inspired designer. Past awards include citations for fine art exhibitions, television commercials, live events, and music videos. As an art director, he was nominated for 2 MTV Awards and 1 for his design of REM's Losing My Religion video. After graduating from the American School in London, José attended the San Francisco Art Institute and earned a Master of Fine Arts. And he designs from a multicultural perspective and with a global audience in mind. This is José Montaño.
Hello, and thank you very much, Kathy. Yeah, I am José Montaño. I am a male, Latino, and wearing a dark blue sweater, and I'm currently in the Sacred Circle Gallery. Well, this is really a very exciting opportunity to speak on this. I had been, as Kathy had mentioned, my previous career, I spent 26 years working in Los Angeles in the entertainment industry as a production designer. And a great deal of my time was with commercials and music videos and a certain amount of film. But it was within the commercial work that I really, when I first began, believed that people like myself, other people of color working in the industry felt, you know, we could have an effect, we could have a change, we could make change. And we did actually do a great deal, I would say, you know, especially in the early 90s, and there was a lot more projects that were a lot more inclusive and so on. But there was a dramatic shift that happened after 9/11. And one of the things, especially in Los Angeles, I started to recognize is the sort of a growing xenophobia, and that was really pronounced with anti-Hispanic sentiment. And having, you know, attended many co-workers within the industries in Sunday dinner parties, whenever I would touch on some of these subjects, non-people of color, people identify as white, and so it would get very defensive. And I was saying what I had been witnessing, and it was an increase in anti-Hispanic sentiment that just started to get worse and worse. And a lot of hate towards the immigrant population and so on. And I was reading both the La Opinión, the Spanish language Los Angeles paper, and the Los Angeles Times. And I started to see how the news was actually, the stories were so different on some of the same subjects, and just how biased. So the only way, since friends weren't paying attention and so on, I just started painting as well. So I continued doing my promo work and commercial work, but I was starting to paint. And as I started painting more, I was very influenced by the Latin American muralists from the revolutions and so on. And as my late father was Bolivian, and my late mother Swedish American, and they were always very much embracing each other's cultures. And so I grew up in a home where, there was Spanish, Swedish, and English being spoken as a baby, and it was just like regular that you just appreciate things. And so I started having so much more, I had a lot more comfort in the painting, and so I started doing more exhibits, which then I started to organize I started an organization of OEMA, Overeducated Minority Artists, because I had a group of friends who had gone to Morehouse and UCLA and different schools, and they were all, artists of color that were dealing with some of the same issues. And so when my late father had cancer, I returned here to Seattle and moved. And since I grew up down the street from here at Daybreak Star Indian Cultural Center, I started to come and teach an intuitive painting elder class. And it was very rewarding. And so I have a very strong personal relationship with Daybreak Star because of growing up down the street. And also my late father worked with Lonnie Reyes. And so when the position came up to be the gallery curator, I was really fully prepared and really enthusiastic. So over the last 2 years, especially with things opening up, things have just changed so much here. We have done an enormous amount of improvements to the building, and also I've been focusing a lot on the permanent art collection, which was first commissioned in 1975 with the 1% of Art program that the city of Seattle had. And, it's now, it was $80,000 it was put into it. It's now worth millions. And, we're open daily, 7 days a week from 10 to 5. And so when the pandemic was happening, a lot more people started hiking in Discovery Park, and that had never heard of Daybreak Star or United Indians. And consequently, we have all these new people discovering us. So it's a different kind of audience. And it's actually very exciting, because then you're sharing your story and your people's and other people's cultural stories with people who are not necessarily expecting it. And it is, they may see the building and think, oh, they're coming in for a bathroom and so on. or to get a glass of water. But when they discovered the galleries, when they see the permanent art collections, then they quite often want to know more. So last year I designed a permanent historic timeline that is now in the main hall. So every time people come in that are saying, well, what's this place about? They can see the historic timeline of United Indians of All Tribes Foundation and how we started in 1970. And through the panels, I share the story that we're actually, this particular area is Hsieh, and it tells the story of the last member of the Hsieh people who was taken from his home and forced to go to Port Madison reservation, Chou in 1913. And so it starts with portraits of him. And so that way we touch into the Removal Act of 1830, but then there's panels about the Relocation Act of 1956 and its effect, and what then really starts to create the urban native population that were forced to come into the cities. Consequently, they're in need of social services, and then that's what leads to what does become the founding of United Indians of All Tribes Foundation. So the foundation we're primarily social services, but also we've always had the cultural component. And the Sacred Circle Gallery, actually the first location was in downtown. There was one in Belltown and one in Pioneer Square. And so it was in the early 90s, it was brought up, back up here to Daybreak Star. But the building itself was initially built with the intention that some of the administrative offices now in the preschools were going to be artist studios. So we now it's sort of a whole new revamp, and I'm doing 4 quarterly shows a year. And this past year, I had the honor of doing a whole retrospective exhibition for Lonnie Ray's, who I mentioned earlier, the older brother of Bernie Whitebear, who was of the Arrow Lakes Band of Confederate Tribes of the Colville. And I got to work with him, and it was an honor. And I had been wanting to do this exhibit for 6 years. I knew his story so well, and it is a story which is really at the heart of what the Daybreak Star and the Sacred Circle Gallery is the story that it addresses creating the antidote, the legacy of cultural genocide. Lonnie was actually, he survived the residential schools. He was there at 9 years old. That's when he first started drawings. And so that is really, the residential schools is cultural genocide. It was formalized. And though, growing up in a tent, being sent to the residential schools, and essentially, having a life poverty, the family was so strong that he continued. It was in the military, went to the University of Washington, got his degree in interior design during the period that Lionel Priest was had formed the School of Architecture. It's a golden era of mid-century Northwest architecture and design in the 50s and 60s. And he goes on to becoming the head interior designer for Hsieh First Bank, and then eventually the art director, and puts together the art collection for Hsieh First Bank that then gets bought out by Bank of America. And so he's able to retire, and he continues with his artwork. So this exhibit was also because we were able to relocate one of his most famous sculptures, the Blue Jay, into the Great Hall. And so when we did the reception, it was another opportunity to show how all Native, such a large percentage of Native families are mixed, and his family, his father was Filipino. So the food which is part of the cultural aspect that I always focus on, was a juxtaposition of Northwest salmon, as well as the Filipino dishes. Then the next show we did was with Rick Jondren, and Rick Jondren, also the Colville, incredible painter, and really we had a great turnout. It's definitely a good example of art by artists who happen to be Indian. I mean, his art is internationalist, and so it was exciting to have other young artists. Andrew Morrison came, I was a huge fan, and was able to see the work of one of the most well-respected painters who happens to be in Washington State. And then for Powwow this year, from July, we featured the art of Alison Bremner, who's Tlingit, and Alison's new work is called The Collection, and she examines the phenomena of object displacement caused by collectors by comparing the voracious collecting of Beanie Babies in the 90s to the collecting of historical Tlingit objects. And so this type of show is something that somebody who just happens to come hiking in Discovery Park is stumbling upon, isn't necessarily prepared to start to recognize, but it's a way of sharing and teaching that especially when you juxtapose the exhibits in the gallery to the permanent art collection. I do see many non-native people having their eyes opened and having them really start to sort of reflect a little bit more on the effects of institutionalized white supremacy and, as I pointed out, the lasting legacy of cultural genocide. And then right now, currently, we have the work of Peter Boone, which I'm very excited about. And he's of the Upper Skagit tribe, Washington State. And Peter is very, very well known within his form line work. And he really, it's a fascinating thing because like the majority of contemporary Native artists who are not only working their cultural identity and their relationship to animals, the environment, and social justice, his touch into social justice is very subtle, but it's present. And he does it by telling the stories of his tribe, his family, and yeah, it's very powerful. He's going to be here actually this weekend. He'll be here Saturday and Sunday for our art market as well. So I hope everybody is able to attend. That's my presentation. And again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jose. Really appreciate that. I'm going to just introduce Jasmine Jackson, who's going to introduce our next presenter. Oh, Jasmine, if you can come on mic.
Sorry, everyone. So I'm actually going to be introducing Kathy. Kathy Hsieh is the Cultural Investments Strategist with the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, helping the agency earn the Seattle Management Association's first Race and Social Justice Management Award. She is also an award-winning theater artist and community activist working to create greater intersectional racial equity within the arts and cultural sector. So next up, we have Kathy.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. I'm really excited to present some truths actually, which really come from all of you in community. the main thing that if I had one thing that I've heard the most from culture workers, from staffs, from artists, especially when we center people of the global majority. And when I say that term, it's a term of empowerment for people who are Black, Indigenous, um, Native American, Pacific Islander, Asian, MENA, Latine, and specifically, it is all we are asking for, and what is central in terms of anti-racist work, is we just want to be treated and respected and held as human beings for the full spectrum of who we are as individuals. And when I speak about us, I am inclusive of all the other social identities that we hold, based on our abilities, based on our disabilities, based on our gender, based on our immigrant status, where we were born, our religion, our sexual orientation, our age, our physical appearance. And so we need to look at the fullness of each of us as human beings, and that should be true for every single person. So in terms of arts and cultural and heritage organizations looking to see how can we do better as we reopen and recover, it really is about remembering that our human resources, the people that work with and for within your organizations, are your most valuable resources that you have. And if you treat your artists and staff and your audience like they are your most valuable asset, which we all are, and allow them to thrive. I'm going to use the inclusive, allow us to thrive to our fullest potential. That's going to be the key to transformative growth for your organization. And this is beyond even just the arts, it's in any organization. So the most basic building block of anti-racist action has and is always about building relationships with people. It's about people over product or people over profit. And the irony of this, of course, is that the more you center the people that are actually creating the art and making the art happen within your organizations. One of my first mentors that I ever had, one of the first jobs I ever had, his whole belief was that if our employees are happy and satisfied and feel fulfilled and feel like they can express themselves authentically to the fullest potential, then everyone they interact with, um, that will spread. So meaning, I mean, this was a business, it was a restaurant. And so he believed that if the employees are happy, and that was his main job as the leader of the business, if the employees are happy, then the employees bring that joy in all they do, and they give all of themselves to the work that they're doing in your organization. And that translates into every patron, every donor, every volunteer, everyone that intersects with that organization feeling that as well. And that actually creates the greatest potential for a thriving organization in our capitalistic society, which unfortunately is based on money. So the reality is the first step is really about how do you make your employees happy. And so while that's easy to say, I mean, some specifics are really about how do you turn your organization into a more human-centered place where you actually trust your employees. If you hired someone, then placing trust in their decision-making abilities, regardless of their position in the organization. I won't even have time to go into the more we can make our organizations less hierarchical and more collective. That's one huge way of really creating that feeling of trust and shared decision making between you and all the people that work with your organization. That will translate into greater satisfaction of all the people who work for your organization, regardless of race. And so it really is about how do you instill policies and practices and procedures that really give each person full respect for who they are, that a diversity of opinions will actually lead to the best decision making within your organization, really allowing each person to show up in their authentic self. So when you're looking at your policies, if you have policies that restrict people in terms of how they should style their hair or what kind of clothes that they need to dress up as and all of those different things, that's where we know that currently in our country, most arts and cultural organizations are centered on very white supremacy values, and that makes a lot of people just from the get-go feel like they are not completely accepted in the organization. When staff people or artists bring up challenging points where they may push back against ideas that are shared, that takes a lot of courage, especially from people who are furthest away from justice. And so, one way to show respect and that you really believe and value them is to really hear what people have to say, um, and that it should. We should be listening to people from all levels of the organization. And in fact, I would actually even say that the people who are working closer to the ground in terms of the people who are working with the public, the front of house staff, um, the artists, they often have the most direct experience with what changes the organization could make that could actually make the organization function in a way that would better serve the audience and the patrons holistically. So some specifics in terms of how you can really center your artists and staff more are really having listening sessions where they get to share with each other and then have ways in which people can share anonymously, have ways that people can share one-on-one in groups, have opportunities where they can share with each other without leadership being in the room, and then have that be shared back to leadership in a way where leadership really listens and hears what people are saying. In a lot of ways, the way this hierarchical system works in this country is that uh, by putting leadership at the very top of a hierarchy, you're actually taking on a lot more responsibility and work than might be possible if you simply made things more collective and allowed staff and artists to be able to invite them to be able to share their ideas. Um, uh, just as a kind of inspirational story, organizations that I've been with where anyone in the organization feels like they are equally valued with anyone else, so there's no positionality. Um, um, a lot of times we feel like we can contribute all the ideas we have. And those ideas are often what actually creates organizations that put on the most creative, innovative, successful, thriving opportunities that the public actually wants to be a part of and enjoys. And when there's joy and creativity and excitement in an organization from every person, then you're getting everyone who not only loves working there, but they actually want to give everything, it and share it with each other because they actually really thrive in that kind of environment. All of us as human beings thrive when we feel like our ideas are being listened to, where we feel valued for who we are, where we can actually come up with greater strategies because we're building on the ideas that everyone's sharing. Contrast that with an organization where if management or leadership or people in power are micromanaging everyone, where it doesn't feel like they're trusting anyone, that's where you get people who actually start shutting down and closing down. And when that happens, all you're going to get is a group of people who are just working for that paycheck. And especially in the arts and cultural sector where we can't even pay people the full value of what they're worth, that leads to high turnover, that leads to always feeling like you're under capacity, you don't have enough energy from your staffs, and where it ends up putting even greater burden on everyone, especially people at the top. So even though it might be scary to share power with people or to feel like you're letting go of something, that letting go also translates into um, um, a relief of having to be responsible for how do I do things better and feeling like you have to take that responsibility on yourselves. The happier and more thriving that all of your staff are and your artists that you're working with, they will contribute to how your organization can thrive. And this also goes with budgeting, because the biggest pushback I hear from a lot of arts and cultural organizations is we don't have enough budget or resources, and that is our biggest issue. And actually, it's that is a barrier in our capitalistic society, but that's actually not the central issue. The reality is a lot more people would be willing to joyfully contribute to a process that an organization works for, even if they didn't make as much money in another organization, if they felt like their ideas were truly heard, and if they were actually allowed the power to be able to implement the fabulous ideas that they have. So the number one strategy is really about starting to collectively inspire your staff, allow them the space, be someone who trusts your staff and your artists enough to sit back and listen to them, really listen, even if some of what they say is hard for you to hear. And this goes for any leader in any arts and cultural organization. Is the more that you can share power, the more that you can really, really make a difference in terms of how we recover in a way that's more holistic and strong. And I'm going to focus on that. That is really my biggest statement that I want to share. I also did want to amplify what Val said earlier about the fact that collectively, whatever your arts and cultural organization is, you are one of an entire ecosystem of other arts and cultural organizations, as well as many individual artists. And the best way that our whole sector can thrive and move forward is the more that we can collaborate and work and build and support each other in this. And right now, it's been so exciting to see so many arts and cultural organizations in the Seattle area work on some of those first steps of diversifying who is actually even at the table with you within your organizations. But as you do that work, do pay attention to the whole ecosystem around you. Many of the artists and the cultural workers that you are hiring and bringing into your organizations, which is great. We definitely want that to continue, because that's going to be the most dynamic way for our whole sector to move forward, is the greater diversity of people based on race or gender or ability. In terms of how we move forward. But as you do that, be cognizant of the reality that in order for our ecosystem to survive, there are many organizations led and centered in these communities already who have been giving many of the people furthest away from justice their first opportunities to work in the arts, have been giving them the leadership training, the mentorship and development that we all need in order to really thrive. And so as you start, if you're a larger organization, start hiring from the pool of people that has been so built up from the smaller organizations that were very culturally specifically and intentionally developing this talent pool. That is creating a huge gap and disparity for those organizations led by people of the global majority, people with disabilities, people of all genders. And that is when then they are going to struggle to be able to continue to thrive. And then there's not going to be that ecosystem that helps keep us all whole. So what we really encourage is to think about how you can truly partner with other organizations that might be the pipeline, and that then it becomes a more holistic sharing. And when you do the partnership, same thing as with your staff and artists, how do you center them in a way that is equitable? And it's that partnership that is going to allow all of us to thrive as an ecosystem and within your own organizations. And that is my sharing. I'm going to introduce our next presenter, who is Fox Whitney. Fox is a queer Black mixed transgender filmmaker, actor, dancer, and teaching artist whose point of view is at the heart of his performance project, Gender Tender. His work has been commissioned and produced by the Henry Art Gallery, On the Board's Northwest New Works Festival and Solo Festival, Velocity's Next Fest Northwest, and Seattle Festival of Dance Improvisation, the Seattle International Dance Festival, Yellowfish Epic Durational Performance Festival, and was also selected for the inaugural season of Seattle's Gay City Arts. He has also been the artistic director for Velocity Dance. And this is Fox Whitney.
Thanks, Kathy, and thanks everybody. So much good stuff has been talked about. I'll give my visual description. I'm a light-skinned Black mixed trans man in my 40s. I have short hair, a beard and mustache, dark Black, and I'm wearing glasses and a Black t-shirt. Behind me, I think, is a globe and a refrigerator. I'm calling from the Southwester in Seaview, Washington. I'm here on an artist residency, so calling in from Seaview. I guess for me, what I thought would be helpful in this ask of how are we going to be more inclusive, how are we going to be anti-racist in this post-pandemic, still in the pandemic moment, I thought it'd be helpful to tell a little bit of my story over the past few years as an artist and administrator. So as Kathy mentioned, I've been the artistic director at Velocity Dance Center for the past couple of years, and how that came about is what I'd like to talk to you about. So as also was mentioned, my project Gender Tender, which is 10 years old and based in Seattle, Washington, has been working with Velocity a lot through the past decade. So I've been a teaching artist, I've been a dancer, I've taken class, I've been a curator, artist curator for different programs. I was an artist in residence there and have produced different works with their festivals and a full-length production in 2019 called Melted Riot. That's based on the Stonewall riots. And we had that happen at Velocity's former space on the 50th anniversary of the riots, right before the pandemic shutdown happened. So as far as 2020, what happened with me was, like a lot of other performing artists, I found myself in shock. I was out of teaching work. I was out of performance work. I was struggling to understand how to pay my rent, how to continue developing work as an artist, struggling as a trans person, trying to understand the political upheaval of the moment, the Black Lives Matter movement, shaking the foundations of the world for everybody. So in that dark moment, I got a call from Erin Johnson at Velocity asking me to consult with her about what's going on at Velocity. How can Velocity support artists in this time? What do we even do? What programs make sense, right? And so this, I think, was an anti-racist action by a leader. I know I wasn't the only BIPOC artist that Erin reached out to, offering us pay for the work of consulting to try to understand what to do in this time. At that moment, I had been committed to teaching at one of Velocity's longest standing summer festival programs, the Seattle Festival of Dance and Improvisation, which had to go completely digital that year, which also was made in decision with artists. Most of us teaching artists who were really like, please help us keep this work, help us keep this paying work, help us stay connected to folks that we miss, that we're worried about. How do we practice embodied action? And this kind of, like other panel members have mentioned, how do we continue to practice care for each other and listening, even in this moment where it seems so hard to even reach out and everything felt very unsafe, right? So with Velocity, we pivoted that program, had the classes online, and my relationship with Erin Johnson deepened as a consulting artist. In the fall after that summer of 2020, she invited me to help facilitate an artist think tank for Velocity. So this again is that step of listening. So entrusted me with the curation of a group of artists of different kinds who have worked with Velocity, who are available who had capacity, right? There was a lot of grief and things happening. So this is not about the quality of artists. I think this is also super important anti-racist sentiment. It is not about the quality. Everybody has quality. It is about people's capacity and interest and where they are at that moment, knowing that that's going to change for all of us depending on where we're at, but that all our input is worthwhile. And this was the group that was ready at that time. So we met over a period of a few months, just listening, right? We were going through a lot of grieving. We were changing our space. Velocity had to move out of our former space. We were trying to understand how to even make new work, what dance even meant in a time where there were no performances. So this was a deep ask. We hired a racial equity expert to help us, Kim Poe, who really helped me to understand things I didn't as an artist about how to, I know somebody mentioned this, the white supremacist notion of perfectionism. How do we let that go? How do we focus on healing and repair, knowing it's not going to operate on our fiscal timelines and it's not going to operate on any sort of like budget that we can expect, but to be with what's real and to like say, this is actually what we need. So we took some time to reassess the mission of the organization to make sure it aligned with what artists were needing. We also took time to even question what dance was and what we were offering as artists, and if it was even the thing to do in this moment, which I think, you know, obviously lots of deep thinkers, but yes, right, arts is necessary to the survival and the revival of our, not just our sector, our cultural world, in the ways that we are experts in presence and embodiment, in care and connection, right? This kind of idea of connection and collaboration that performance artists especially understand. So this think tank grew for me into being offered the role of artistic director of Velocity, which I took on with feeling intimidated and also thrilled to be able to understand I would have access, right? That I'd gone through this gatekeeping part about being trusted, about making decisions, about curation, about money, about who was there, who needed to be there, who we were talking to. And so one of the things that I've learned very much so from my experience as artistic director is that we all need help. Like, not only did I as the artistic director need help as a new artist to administration in general, Erin as executive director needed help and support in this time of trying to understand development and fundraising in a very prickly moment. All the Velocity staff needed help, that we definitely needed each other if we were going to continue to enact our mission and support artists, right? So a lot of exciting things came about, in my opinion, from being listened to as a leader. We got a T-BIPOC waiver established. So that was for trans and BIPOC artists, so that if the classes were online, in person, we were making sure that people were supported. And it's just a little thing to do to like adjust the power dynamic, but it was a thing we could do in the time. I know other panelists mentioned this, like what little things, what little authentic things can you do to make sure that people know you mean what you're saying? And I know we all have big dreams. I often see organizations get overwhelmed by these dreams of equity. And it's really this, like Kathy said it well, relationship building, actual relationship building, getting to know the artists, getting to know the audiences. You'll hear some dogs barking because I am in the woods. So just know, okay. I also wanted to say, like, this is, I'll say it over and over again, put QT BIPOC people in leader positions. Make us leaders. If you want things to change, leadership needs to be Black. Leadership needs to be POC. Leadership needs to be trans. Leadership needs to be queer. If you want to actually live what you are desiring, dreaming of, you need to enact it and hire us. And then not just hire us, right, as tokens, but support us. I received so much mentorship in the moment where I took on this kind of intimidating task that I needed to be listened to as a person with a radical approach. This has also been said, like some of the things we say They may be scary, disturbing. It may be like, you need to cut this program, or you need to not hire this person for these racist reasons, and we need to be listened to. We need to understand the timelines are going to be different. This kind of work, it's forever work, right? I think a lot of times as an administrator, I felt the pressure trying to fit in the process of repair into like a yearly plan, which I understand that's the way the structures have worked, but we need to think about ways to get around these and change these structures. We need to let go. This is my next thought in that vein. We need to let go of the old dead reality. This is what the pandemic gave us a moment for. We need to speak honestly. We need to speak transparently, especially about race, especially about gender, especially about money. Like, it is super exciting. Some of the most important meetings I had over my time as artistic director were like, understanding the budget. What does that mean exactly? When numbers get over like $300,000, this is no money I've ever seen in my lifetime. Like, we need mentorship on understanding, what does that mean? What power do I have? What kind of decisions can I make with others collectively to use these resources in the best way, trusting that we're all there because we want to support artists and we want to see art thrive, and we want to see artists thrive and people thrive. Another key thing I learned for the past 2 years, support artist administrators' personal artistic practices, right? Part of why I had all the information I had to make me a skilled person for leadership role, I learned by being an artist and an independent entrepreneur on my own for the past few decades. This work is collaborative, and if you want to express care, again, Kathy said this well, you need to be there with the fullness of the people that you're working with. And many of the people in our sector are artists. And so they also need the support and the care in their tender artist selves to thrive as administrators, as curators, as audience members. And I think like we are all artists. Let me just say something kind of radical. I think everybody is a creative person, right? And again, it's not this thing about quality or like passing some test. It's about what artists are showing up, have interest, have passion, have care. Those are the people that are going to make the creativity thrive in all the different roles. So again, this non-hierarchical collaborative approach is the thing that's going to save us, in my opinion, whether that's partnerships with people, with organizations. And again, this thing about centering care is, this was also mentioned, there's no scarcity of goodness. There are so many organizations and artists and people who want to make things happen and want to work together. So again, it's this thing of saying something, reaching out, doing the work of connecting, which can be hard when we're dealing with so much grief, right? We're all dealing with a lot of grief over the past few years in our sector. We all need that extra time to kind of like get our feet on the ground and understand what is even happening. What do we want? What things are we letting go of now? And so my last little comment here in my own personal story is, so as an artist and an artist administrator, I'm currently transitioning out of my role as artistic director at Velocity, which I think is the organization supporting me as an artist and a curator, understanding my radical viewpoint, that curation needs to be collaborative. It needs to be an ever-changing, ever-evolving group of people with different perspectives. And so that means I don't need to hang on to that position. I need to grow and work towards sustainability for myself, for my community. And for me, that means going back to being a full-time artist. It also means changing in the way that I'm a leader. So I'll be joining the board at Velocity, which I have said yes to, specifically because they listen to my radical viewpoint, my desires about wanting more artists as board members, trying to understand how we could get board members paid for the service that they do, so they feel like actually considered pieces and not just donors that are showing up in like these kind of outmoded ways, right? And the more people I've talked to in our sector, everybody is down. So I think it's just a matter of time if we don't lose this listening, collaborative essence and this like belief that we're all creative people and we're gonna work it out. that's my presentation.
Thank you so much, Fox. I'm going to actually ask all the panelists to come on screen. We've got some questions that have come in the chat, and I'm actually going to bring on Jasmine Jackson, who's supporting me, and she will start off with some of the questions while I get everyone else on screen.
Hi again. So the first question I have is, how does flattening hierarchy intersect with decision-making, curation, relationships between staff and boards? Would you guys let me know if you'd like me to say it again or share it in the chat.
Yeah, maybe also share it in the chat again. I'm happy to start this off. And again, I invite any of the panelists who'd like to also respond to that.
It's hard, Kathy, because that's my question.
Yeah, no, totally. But you can respond in any way you'd like.
No, I don't have an
to the
answer.
question.
That's why I put it in the chat.
So for me, actually, Fox, the story that you shared is actually a perfect example of what happens when, for me, right now, most organizations are built on a hierarchy. There are a lot of growing pool of arts and cultural organizations that are formed as a collective, but the ones that are more hierarchical, I think the first place to start is where the people who have the most power in the organization start by doing more listening sessions and really hearing where staff are coming from, and that's how we start. So for obviously, I believe that things take steps, and before we can run a marathon, we have to be able to take a step at a time. So I don't think I'm not one that advocates for smashing the hierarchy completely if that's not where you started, because sometimes that change causes great divisiveness that actually then works backwards for an organization. But in a step-by-step process, I think just like the story that Fox shared, where you start by really listening to your artists, creating opportunities for people to be able to share with each other. And then from those ideas, then you can move a way forward. So just as an example, the office I work for, the city has faced a huge budget cuts as everyone else has. And so then we were being told as a state department, we had to make the decision on how to make those budget cuts. Originally, the leadership was just going to make the decision and then share that information with staff. I actually pushed back on that and said that if we do that, it's just going to demoralize everyone in our organization. I asked instead if we could do a more collective process. And luckily, our finance director was like, sure, she was very open to that. So what we formed was just different opportunities for anyone on staff to just share about the budget process. And the way I wanted to frame it was, instead of looking at like, what are we going to cut, which just makes everyone just upset, instead framing it like, what are the programs that we value so much that no matter what, this is what we're going to keep. And in those discussions, it was an opportunity for everyone to really share what they valued. And a lot of it came down, we valued the people. So we were going to determine to save all jobs. And then there were certain programs that we really, really valued, our youth-centered programs, investment in communities. And from all of that discussion, we knew what we valued, and everyone had different opportunities. We had online surveys, we had anonymous surveys, we had discussion groups. You could meet one-on-one with different people. We collected all this stuff into a shared document. And then in looking over all that stuff, we knew exactly there was huge alignment. And because everyone felt like they were able to participate in that process, what happened was then it was easy to look at, okay, these are the things we value. So in order to keep these things, are we okay with letting go of these other things? And because everyone was a part of that process, everyone felt that we all felt like we had a shared responsibility in holding up and being accountable to the decisions that we had made together. And it actually ended up building huge connection and bonds between each other. So the leadership did make the final decision based on all that input, but it was clear based on all that input that we were all aligned in terms of what we want to keep, and what was okay for letting go for now. And it actually created such connection between all the staff that that process actually created a lot of other positive consequences from that, and really showed leadership that sometimes when you trust in the brilliance of the artists and the people that you're working for, then they trust you in the decisions that you make based on the input that they had. So it still allows us to move forward in a way where it doesn't feel like as scary as it would be if the leadership had just made the decision and then everyone just hated leadership for the decisions they made, even if the decisions they ended up making might have been what the collective might have initially offered in the first place. So I offer that budget decision because that is often the scariest thing that leadership is often least willing to let go of, is budget decisions. But if you do it in a collective collaborative way, you'll actually get a lot more support and when you're in the top position, and it will also engender a lot more trust and support from staff where we all feel like we're invested in the decision that we had an opportunity to really input on and help influence.
Thanks so much, Kathy. Does anybody else want to chime in? Does anyone else have anything? Okay, the second question we have is, how do we reconcile the need for QT-POC leadership in arts orgs with, sorry, let me read this again. How do we reconcile the need for QT-POC leadership in arts orgs with the problem of there often being a larger burden of uncompensated work at the top and in the back end?
I can speak to that a little bit. I think for me, right, I kind of come from this dance world where we're very used to being super undercompensated. There's something somebody said though that I think is about who has the passion for it, right? This is kind of the thing I was talking about for artist administrators in QT BIPOC leadership, is like, trust the artist. If the artist shows up to be a leader, like some of us won't, right? It's not for us, or that moment's not for us. And part of what I feel like I'm learning is being open about this desire for more collective curation, more collaborative leadership overall brings about changes, slow changes right now. And I wouldn't be anti-drastic changes, but changes in the amount of money that's going towards staff, going towards curators, going towards those people doing that work, as artists understand the complexity of those roles by being in them and being able to ask for their worth, right? Somebody said that in the chat, like, to pay me this, to do this, I think is a whole learning experience for artists in that administration realm. And as I hope to encourage more BIPOC leaders, I would say, yes, ask for your worth. Like, don't take the job if it's not going to pay you, and make that known. You know, like, that's something the organization needs to grapple with. If they're not able to offer you what you need or the support you need in that moment, or make changes to make it so that you can do that, so that you could be part of a 3-person team who works maybe just 10 hours a week to do this work because that's what's in your capacity, then that's not for you, right? Maybe that's not the organization. Maybe that organization shouldn't keep running if it's not going to like listen to that kind of feedback from those people who are like engaged with it enough to take a lower rate, because understanding the cultural payoff.
Thank you, Fox. In addition to that, I would say that sometimes, and I mean this with the best of hearts, sometimes people feel that, say if you're a white leader at an arts and cultural organization, and you are really trying to be a true ally, which I think this question is, like, really wanting to honor how do we really make this happen when we feel like we can't offer enough compensation for the people that we would like to bring on to our organizations. And the reality is a lot of white allies spend so much time, and I love you all for it, but this is one of the things that's keeping us from moving forward. You spend so much time worrying and trying to grapple with it and struggling with these questions, and it's almost like you're overthinking a lot of it, in the sense of sometimes you just have to like trust that, make the offer, and if someone that you make the offer to says no and they give you the reason why, then you have the information you need to move forward. But lots of times you spend so much time like worrying about the consequences of whatever, where then you end up not even making the offer in the first place because you've talked yourself out of the reality of what's possible.
Yeah, this is the point I was making about us spending much more time on communication than sort of self-reflection. We have to actually learn how to make the offer when we're uncertain, and to risk someone saying no. But right now we're really not there yet.
And a no doesn't mean like they're saying no to you, your organization. What they're saying no to is the offer that you made. So then, but then you know exactly, like Fox said, is it because they need more money in order to be able to do that, or is it just something that maybe the timing isn't right? And no is just a word, a two-letter word, and so, but we have to get over our fear of rejection, and put ourselves out there, because that's the only way we develop the relationships to get to know each other, to even figure out what it is. The other possibility is if you do have some resources where, like, say you're grappling with, you want to, I've been hearing this a lot of people have been trying to diversify their programming as their first place, because maybe you don't have any job turnover, to diversify on staff yet. So you're diversifying your programming and you're trying to create more diverse programming. You know, the first place is, but you're not sure how to even start. The first place is you do need to come up with some budget or barter. Even like if you've got a space, maybe you can barter space. If you've got ad space in your program, you can barter that. Maybe you're a terrific web designer and you can exchange that service for exchange for someone else's service. It doesn't have to be about money. It could be bartering. But you do need to center your information about like what to even do by resourcing the community that might have the best voice in terms of helping you make those decisions. I've been hearing of a lot of organizations just, okay, we're going to do a program like about this, and like centered in the Indigenous community, and you've never even met with anyone in the Indigenous community, even see if that's something that they would even be interested in your organization doing, and it just ends up feeling like appropriation. So the first place is you do need to take some time to do some development and research, by meeting with people in the community, but resourcing their time, in and allowing them to decide if they want to participate with you in that way or not. And if the answer is no, that's fine. Then move on to something else. But don't then feel like, oh, you tried and you got one no, and then that's all you're going to try. Jose, did you want to respond? You had your mic off, so I didn't know.
No, actually, you know, there was something that Fox had brought up, which reminded me of something that I finally started addressing personally after I was being asked by different organizations to donate to their fundraisers my artwork as an artist myself, and I realized that they wouldn't approach their lawyer or accountant or doctor with the idea that the artist, quite often in the society, is considered, well, they have a passion, they have fun doing it, so they automatically should be giving. And so because it's so dominated within the culture, artists have a hard time defending themselves a lot of times. And so I think it's very good what Fox was saying, like really communicating. That's another thing which has been brought up. Yeah, it's very, very important. And yes, I mean, they, especially within artistic organizations, it all comes back to intent. You know, quite a lot of times people do say, well, we need money, but actually they haven't really developed their idea even. So they don't need money yet. They need to go and develop that. So yeah, no, I'm following. Thank you.
Great. I had a question for all of you. Um, what, like, if there's one thing that arts and cultural organizations could do that would make it worth your time um, to uh, work with them, um, what might that, like, what might one thing be that would really make it worth your time that's equal to the money, right? I mean, we all, yes, we all should be definitely compensated for the value of our time, but if there's one other thing that is equal to that.
I think for me, it's a combination of passion and service. If I think it's going to be good for the community, for a community, not the generic the community, but for a community, I'm more likely to say yes. And if an individual artist is super passionate about it, I'm ready to be with them in it. But yeah, those two things together lean me in for sure.
Anyone else? I know for me, yeah, the value of the project, and also I actually I'm always willing to take on a project if I feel like the organization really values me and my ideas and gives me flexibility in how I might want to manage the project or do the project. Um, I don't like feeling when someone brings me on for a project where they already have a set agenda of what they want, and I start to feel like I was only brought on because of my race or my gender, um, uh, and that I could have been any other Asian American woman of a certain age, but that truly feels like they're willing to collaborate with me, and that it was me for the wholeness of who I am and my ideas, um, that they want to bring me in, and that they're open if I offer a different perspective on how to do the project than they might have originally thought about. So it actually feels like I'm actually contributing as opposed to being tokenized. There uh, was a question, though the person wasn't sure exactly how to phrase it, but really wanting to look at intersectionality a little bit more beyond just race, but in terms of the wholeness of people around uh, disability, around other genders. And just wondering in terms of the panel itself, and I'm not wanting to just have Aimee be the only person responding to this, but how do we, in terms of our work, how do we make space for people who are um, uh, who show up in a myriad of different ways that can offer value to what we do in terms of creating greater accessibility? All of you are leaders in your organizations as well. So just what are some of the things that you've been doing to create greater accessibility for different communities within your organizations? I know one thing that I've been doing as an actor.
Is this question for me specifically?
Oh, it's actually for the panel because the person who asked it didn't want to put the burden of responding to the accessibility questions specifically on Aimee. But Aimee, you're free to respond if you'd like to. So I was just going to respond that for me as an actor, when I am doing theater shows, lots of times I will be the one to ask the staff how they're going to create greater accessibility for people with different disabilities. Um, to get them to even think about that question, especially if it's a small company, to just like Aimee's point earlier, that it doesn't have to be all of a sudden you have to come up with budget to hire ASL interpreters, but maybe that first next step is making a script available or a device available, e-reader with the script on it, so that if someone who is deaf comes to the show, they have a way of accessing the dialogue that's happening, and that can be an easy first step.
Yeah, I'm going to step up and just be honest that I've been doing a piss poor job at accessibility, especially in anything that's live. The time of COVID made it more accessible because so much stuff was online. It was a little easier then to add, for me, for example, to add an interpreter in a way that didn't impact the rhythm of a live performance. So I'm just collecting information on all the different ways that there are to make things particularly accessible for the hearing impaired community. I struggle a bit more with sight impairments and how we might make that work more accessible. So yeah, piss poor job and trying to do better.
Thanks for being transparent. Would anyone else like to respond? I don't know. Aimee,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead, Fox.
I was just going to say, echoing Valerie a bit, dance is horrible, right? And part of what happened with the pandemic, accessibility wise, was gave us a chance actually for all these kind of structures or spaces that we were in because they were what we could afford, even if their accessibility was shitty, you know, like it's given us an opportunity to, like, as we look towards new spaces, new partners, to make sure, like as an administrator, to check in about accessibility at the start and like getting those things into the budget sooner and understanding even how are we making our programming available to artists who have different access needs has been a huge thing we talked about in the think tank and just in artists in general, because we're missing like so much brilliance by not even like considering those things, even in our calls for work or audition notices. So, yeah.
I think that there's also another question. There is both that we need to do a better job at being more accessible. And the other thing that the pandemic did was it really pushed on what is the definition of theater. Is the mediated still theater? How do we determine liveness? Is liveness important? Like there's a lot of big questions that we need to solve as we're bending towards the value of accessibility.
And Aimee, I'm going to flip the question for you a different way. What would make you be able to participate in more artistic programming as an individual?
Well, for me, one thing that I love to see is not just accessibility as an add-on, but accessibility as part of the project itself, as an integral part of that project, of that program. Like, for example, with dance, you know, there are many opportunities for visuals and dance. You know, you can also add dancers who are in wheelchairs. Like, those are absolutely beautiful things that you can include. So not just someone watching on the sidelines as a disabled person, but being included in the productions themselves. Also, sign language is also art in and of itself. And it can be included in art and be something that is also accessible while being art.
Great, thank you. In the chat, we've added, there's a link to a survey. We would love all attendees to be able to take. It's anonymous. It just helps us in our planning for future. And also, we would love for you to share in chat what is one action that you can take from today's session or anything that any of the speakers spoke about that you feel you can take in terms of becoming or helping your organization or you as an artist, however you identify, move the needle forward in terms of creating a more inclusive, equitable arts and cultural sector. I would love if any of the panelists are open to just sharing something that you you are trying to honor in terms of, it's a collective world and we all have a role to take something that you are doing moving forward to really try to create greater inclusion.
I'm sorry, Kathy, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, just what's one action that you are really striving to center moving forward in how you work?
I think I'm going to sit a bit with the question of accessibility. I've been having conversations with Teresa Thuman at Sound, and she's really been encouraging in that direction. So I'm going to spend some more time with that.
Thanks, Val. I will say the same, that's something that I've been thinking about, both for our Office of Arts and Culture, myself personally, in terms of creating space with the organizations that I work with, in terms of how do I support greater access for more people, and what are those tangible ways, especially in the small companies, to just take even one step forward in that realm.
Yeah, a thing I've been thinking about a lot is also intergenerationality, especially inside of dance and performance, because a lot of times it's a shame. Like the age grouping is very specific and it's not a great access to that power and brilliance that we have at all. To like, how can I fight ageism, right? As a choreographer, as a director, how can I encourage that in others too, and the kind of processes that we're making structures?
I agree. The intergenerational bridge needs to be explored, because otherwise we're going to end up with groups of people on both sides just standing there looking at each other.
Jose or Aimee? And we'd love the audience to also respond in the chat to this prompt of what action are is that next action that you can take or you are striving to do.
I would, one of the things that I have been, and I mentioned it briefly when discussing Lonnie Ray's being Indopino, is it's very exciting when meeting Native artists and hearing their life stories. There's an artist, Frank Peterson, who is a member of the Macaw tribe. And has an extensive history with the tribe and very, very proud. His grandfather met his grandmother in Hsieh Bay because his grandfather was a Swedish fisherman who happened to be coming by Hsieh Bay. And they moved to Ballard. And that's where Frank's parents were born. And that's where he grew up. He went to Ballard High School. And recently we've been discussing doing some projects with the Nordic Heritage Museum. And, recognizing the Sama community. And it's, for me, as I mentioned earlier, my whole life experience is how do we have cultural gatherings in which we bring together these families that are made up of all different races. Because I do know that ultimately when we're dealing with this constant hyphenation, when we're like identity politics, and like no baby is born saying, well, I am this because, Richard Nixon's census said that I'm Hispanic. It begins opening up people's eyes to certain things and what their idea of what a native looks like, and what and then you introduce global indigenism, and so reparations is every morning when waking up, what can I do? Opportunity. Is it peer revolution? Well, we know the history of that. My grandfather was one of the architects of the revolution in Bolivia in 1952 that basically was the was no different than the Cuban Revolution in 1959. So I grew up with that. So how does one do change? Well, I do believe in cultural affirmation, and, because culture is a fancy word for mama, ultimately. And it's mama that, feeds, creates the home, and it's all our home. And so, yeah, really recognizing and helping young people, communities to be proud of all of who they are. And not getting stuck with the them and us, because that is, yeah, because we're not gonna, yeah, that's.
Thank you, Jose. The other thing I want to just make sure is mentioned, this came from a lot of our, many of us people of the global majority have been actually meeting regularly throughout the pandemic to talk about like, how can we help move things forward in our roles and through our identities. And really encouraging arts and cultural organizations, as I mentioned about the care for your staffs and employees and artists, to think about like how can you implement wellness days where you allow people, like if they just need a day off for their own self-care, they don't have to be like sick or have COVID, but literally they just need a day off to take care of personal things. That can be a huge benefit for a lot of people to add in. And other specifics are really just finding different ways that just build your team of artists in terms of making sure that they feel like they have opportunities to get to know each other as human beings, especially now we're in a very uh, uh, virtual world where we're not even necessarily all gathering in the same rooms anymore. Even as we're creating art together, we're oftentimes not in the same room as often as we are. So how do you create opportunities for people to simply be able to honor each other? And there's been some companies where they had a board member who was willing to make dinner for everyone working on the project, and it was a break from the work, but it was a set aside time that allowed people to get to know each other personally. So little touches like that, where it doesn't have to be a lot of resources, can make a huge difference. And just even just welcoming the artistic leader of an organization, just welcoming each person as they join, even if it's just temporary on contract, but just having that personal time to get to know each other, so it doesn't feel like you've joined an organization, especially a large organization, where you never even meet the director until months into working at the entity. So those are just some really basic examples, but we can all be creative. We're creative people as a community. We can all be creative in coming up with ways that we can be more intentional about building community with each other. I want to so thank our panelists and our interpreters, and all of you for joining in this conversation. I know this is just one, and these are just a few perspectives, but the first part is you can actually start having conversations of these yourself with your boards and your staffs and your artists. Definitely resource their time if they're doing that for you, so that you can creatively come up with what are some strategies that you can do to really create and work towards greater anti-racist action. I don't know if anyone wants to drop any other thing in the chat. We will keep the room open for a little bit longer, where you can please do encourage you to fill out that survey and to drop in your specific actions that you might be thinking of, and invite the panelists as well if there's any other last words that you'd like to have, to feel free to drop that into chat. But thank you all so much. It was fabulous having this time with all of you, and we look forward to being in community with all of you as we keep moving forward together.